want to give you as much as I can while my leg holds up. All right. Let's get Matthew 17 again, but also get Mark chapter 9. Matthew 17 and Mark 9. I want to show you something real quick. It's a shame we have to discuss some of the technicalities behind these passages, but I'd rather just preach about prayer for a while. But it's good to get all of this. So, verse 21, Matthew 17:21. If you have a King James Bible, you have verse 21. If you're in Bible school tonight, you should have a King James Bible. That's our textbook, and that's one of the requirements for class. But almost all the new Bibles take that verse out. It is omitted completely. And in Mark 9:29, this is the equivalent of it. He said unto them, "This kind can come forth by nothing but by prayer and fasting." So that verse is not disputed completely, but part of it is. In a lot of the new Bibles, they take out part of that verse. And instead of saying prayer and fasting, it just says, "but by prayer," full stop. And they take fasting out. So I'll give you two quick thoughts on this. When you go back to the ancient manuscripts, right? The two, what the scholars always refer to as oldest and best. Now, when we get to manuscript evidence class, we'll talk about how I think silly that phrase is. I kind of doubt they're the oldest, and I certainly don't think they're the best. But Sinaiticus and Vaticanus do not have Matthew 17:21. It is omitted in those early manuscripts, what the scholars consider early. However, the vast majority, we're talking thousands of manuscripts, do have this verse. Now, what the scholars will say is, yes, but Sinaiticus and Vaticanus come from the 300s, which again, debatable. And all the thousands that have it come from the 800s and 900s. So shouldn't we go to the earlier source because it is closer to the original? Well, just because it's closer to the original doesn't mean that it's valid or that it's not been corrupted. Something can be corrupted early on. Furthermore, these manuscripts that come from the 800s and 900s, there are also several dozen manuscripts that come from the 400s and 500s that have the verse. There are Latin translations of the Bible from the 100s that have the verse. So 100s comes before Sinaiticus and Vaticanus. So if you want to talk about oldest and closer to the originals as far as time and chronology, we have an argument that Matthew 17:21 should be there. Origen, who we study in church history, in the 200s, mid-200s, he is famous for changing the Bible and taking things out and moving it around. In his commentary on Matthew, he admits the verse is there. So here's the guy, if anybody wanted to change it, he would. And he was very fond of going to what eventually scholars say are these oldest and best. He admits the verse is there. So if you're just talking manuscripts, there's a very good argument. This is the historical side of it. Very good argument that Matthew 17:21 should be there and that the word fasting in Mark should be there. Now, let's talk about it from a practical standpoint. Now, this is more of a preaching approach to it, but I think nonetheless valid. The only way to get rid of this kind of a devil is prayer and fasting, right? You need that promise, but boy, you're going to have to put a little bit of prayer work and fasting work into it. It's going to take some effort. Now, if you're the devil, wouldn't you want to cover up that? No. Wouldn't you want to say, shh, don't tell anyone about that? Let's calm down on that prayer and fasting thing. So just from a very practical standpoint, it makes sense that, hey, let's go ahead and do that because obviously there was something else that these apostles needed to do. That's unanimously agreed upon because Mark's gospel says this kind doesn't come out but by prayer. At the minimum, you have that. Well, if fasting is also going to make a difference in the spiritual world, if it will intensify your prayers, then it just makes sense to find such an admonition, a command, or charge, if you will. Okay, so that's some of the nuts and bolts of it. Now, Matthew 17, verse 22. And while they abode in Galilee, Jesus said unto them, The Son of Man shall be betrayed into the hands of men, and they shall kill him, and the third day he shall be raised again. Jesus, we don't know what led up to this. They've gone back now to their hometown, to the home base, if you will, Galilee. Then they're going to be in Capernaum, as we see in the next verse. And Jesus just drops this on them again. Now, he doesn't explain it any further. It's worded slightly differently, but it's basically the same truth as what we had in chapter 16. This time, however, Peter doesn't rebuke him. This time, the response is this: they were exceeding sorry. Now, I'm going to reserve a lot of my comment on this for chapter, I think it's 20. We're going to revisit, Jesus is going to say this again, and I'm going to show you the response of the disciples, and you'll see how this all kind of comes together. But as it falls into this chapter, this is one of the manifestations of his divinity, is he is predicting his own death. Guys, there have been, a dozen men in the history of the world that predicted their death, the day, the time, the way in which it would happen. Okay, enough people, if they predict it, some are going to get it right. And some even make it happen that way, right? So they kind of cheat the system. But think about it. I mean, where are you going to die? How are you going to die? Who's going to do it? And then raise again the third day? I'm sorry, but if you count it all up in all the Gospels, there are 9 different things that he says about his death, burial, resurrection before it happens. 9 different details. None of them common details. It's not like, I'm going to have a heart attack, which is fairly common. I'm going to die at the hands of these sinful men. To say such things, this is kind of outside the norm. This is an incredible prophecy. So it validates his claims for divinity to know these kind of things. Prophecy always does. All right, so verse 24. And when they were come to Capernaum, they that received tribute money came to Peter and said, Doth not your master pay tribute? One of the accusations that people constantly made against Jesus and his disciples was that they wanted to destroy the law of Moses, or the traditions of Moses. They wanted to tear down the temple. Right? Even when Jesus gets arrested, that's one of the false witnesses comes and says, we heard him say he's going to tear down the temple. So now they're trying to bring a slightly less, harsh accusation, but are you guys going to skip out on the temple tax, the tribute money that a Jew is supposed to give to the temple? Because Jesus has run the money changers out of the temple, and he's going to do it again. He's done it once already. He's going to do it again in Matthew chapter 21. But they think they're going to catch Jesus with some sort of, I want to say evidence, but like a position against the temple. Now, let me point this out quickly. This tribute, the word tribute in this passage, Matthew 17:24, the Greek word is didrachmon, which is how can I say it? It is the temple tax. It is what's the right word here? 2 drachmas, I think, was the ancient Greek word for it. Drachma was a small piece of money. So this didrachmon was 2 drachmas. So this tribute, now later on, Jesus is going to get asked. Remember, the Herodians they say, is it lawful to pay tribute to Caesar? And he says, show me the coin, whose image is this? That word tribute in Matthew 22:17 is a different Greek word. It's kensos, and that refers to the tax that you would pay to the Roman government. So just so that you don't confuse those 2 tribute monies. All right, so this has to do with the temple. Doth not your master pay tribute? Verse 25, he saith, yes. And when he was coming to the house, I like Peter's answer. Yes, and he walks off. He's not going to stand around and argue, right? When it comes to politics, that's a great answer. You pay tribute? Yes. Just walk off. I don't want to talk about that. Yes, and when he was coming to the house, Jesus prevented him. Now, prevented him, that's Old English. He got in the way. He stopped him. He prevented him, saying, What thinkest thou, Simon? Of whom do the kings of the earth take custom or tribute? Of their own children or of strangers? Simple question. If you are within the family of the king, you're exempt from taxes. That's how all the governments of the world worked back then, and probably today as well. Or of strangers. Now this word stranger, sometimes that word is pointing at Gentiles, right? But the way this word, and again, even the Greek word behind this is different. The Greek word here is often translated as another man's or other people's or something like that. So what he's saying here is, if you are not in the king's family, right? If you're in the family, you don't pay tribute. But if you're not in the family, then you do pay custom and tribute. You're the stranger. You're the outsider. All right, so it's a simple question. And of course, Peter has this right. Verse 26, Peter saith unto him, of strangers. That's where you collect the tax, the tribute. Jesus saith unto him, then are the children free. That's the logical conclusion. Now, the temple. Whose house is that? John chapter 2, my Father's house. Does Jesus have to pay tribute then? If this is his Father's house, technically, he does not have to pay tribute. Now, this is a wonderful example, guys, great example of Romans chapter 14. And let me explain this. The stronger brother, and he's going to make room for the weaker brother. The weaker brother, these other Jews don't understand that Jesus doesn't actually have to pay tribute. And it's not even a technicality. This isn't a loophole. It's not even a gray area, to be honest. It's just one of those things that they don't realize this fact yet. They don't have this scriptural knowledge. So they're the weaker brother. So Jesus says in verse 27, notwithstanding. So could Jesus say, no, I'm not paying the tribute? Yes. Would he be sinning? No. But would that make sense to the society there? They would not understand that at all. At all. So he's going to have some grace here. Notwithstanding, lest we should offend them. Guys, you got to pick your battles. Jesus is choosing his battles wisely. He could fight this tribute thing and be right, and he would win. But in the end, he'd leave a lot of people scratching their heads going, okay, you made this weird claim, but why are all the rest of us paying it? We're Jews just like you. And it would have brought up so many more questions. Rather, just pay the tax and move on to other more important things. Get on to the greater revelation. So, lest we should offend them, go thou to the sea and cast an hook and take up the fish that first cometh up. And when thou hast opened his mouth, thou shalt find a piece of money. That take and give unto them for me and thee. Now, this fishing expedition here, where he gets the money, Jesus doesn't tell Peter, go to the guys collecting the tribute money and tell them this story. Now, maybe Peter did, but this seems like a little private thing where he's just showing Peter, God's going to provide. And God's going to provide in ways that you wouldn't expect, but just go about your business. Peter knows how to fish. So how am I going to pay the bills? Do what you know how to do. And then, who knows, you might just get more out of that fishing trip than you expect. I've heard a lot of good preaching from this text. Now, to be honest, I don't think there's a lot that needs to be taught here. Jesus simply miraculously organizes this money to come and then pay the tax, and on you go with the story. But Jesus taught us to be fishers of men. Yeah. So I've heard a lot of people talk about this. Say, if you're in some sort of a financial need, just go soul winning. And you never know what you might find in the fish of that, in the mouth of that fish. I don't think that's what Jesus had in mind here, but you see, you could go a lot of different practical directions with that. All right, so chapter 18. Chapter 18. If I could sum up the chapter, I would say the soft heart of the servant. There's quite a bit in the chapter about humility and forgiveness. And of course, those two things I think are going to go together. But the soft heart of the servant, verses 1 to 6, the humility of a child. Verses 7 to 14, Jesus will talk about hindering a child. Verses 15 to 20 will focus on church discipline. Verses 21 to 35 will talk about complete forgiveness. So chapter 18 and verse 1. At the same time came the disciples unto Jesus, saying, who is the greatest in the kingdom of heaven? Now, the greatest in the kingdom of heaven is the one that's not worried about being the greatest in the kingdom of heaven. But let me unpack that question just a little bit. Some people might ask this question because they are seeking the recognition that comes by being the greatest. Right? They just want to be seen as the greatest, and that's vainglory, and therefore they're asking for the wrong reasons. And I actually think the disciples were asking for that reason. They were trying to one-up each other and be, in the kingdom. James and John wanted to sit on the right and left hand, and they just wanted a great position. Which tells you something, that even though these men were apostles and great revelation, they still had a lot to learn. Now, some people would ask this same question, but they're asking not because they seek to be recognized. They just want to know, Lord, what do you consider great? I'd like to achieve that. I don't care if anybody on earth ever sees it. I just want to go about doing what you think is great. So in that case, that would be a very legitimate question. But the Lord knows their heart. So verse 2, he answers accordingly. Jesus called a little child unto him and set him in the midst of them. Nobody could answer questions like Jesus, right? So good with these examples. He just looks around the room and says, now what could I use to teach him? Come here, Buti. Come, sit here. And now he's going to teach him a lesson. Preach a whole sermon just based on a little child sitting there, right? Verse 3, and he said, verily I say unto you, except ye be converted. Now that word convert there, in this case, it means just to turn, just to change. This is not the same convert as in get saved, okay? However, there is a connection here, but this particular word, except ye be converted, you need to have a mind shift. You got to get your attitudes right about this topic. Except ye be converted and become as little children, ye shall not enter into the kingdom of heaven. Wow. He's saying this to his disciples. Now understand, guys, Old Testament, right? The body of Christ doesn't exist yet. I know that these men will be in the body of Christ when we get into the book of Acts, but as of this time, the cross hasn't happened, and all of our New Testament truth can't be shoved into this. There's still so much we need to learn from this, though. These disciples needed to have an attitude adjustment. All right, so here these guys are getting these great revelations, and we can already see it happening. It's starting to puff them up. And they're starting to think, man, God is showing us so much. And God is using us in so many great ways. And if we pray and fast, we could remove mountains. And all we got to do is go fishing, and he's going to pay all of our bills. Oh, man, we are some. And Jesus has to say, whoa, you guys are taking all this stuff we're giving you, and it's pushing you in the wrong direction. So guys, you got to turn, you got to convert, you got to change your focus here and realize we're not giving you all this revelation to make you great. How should you properly use it? He says you need to become as little children. Now in verse 4, thank God for verse 4. It says, whosoever therefore shall what? Humble himself as this little child. I don't know how many times I've heard preachers get to this and say you need to have the faith of a child. I don't know of that verse. Now, I get it. I mean, I understand what they mean when they say that. And in many ways, yes, the faith of a child can be a very good thing, and that you completely trust the Lord and you don't trust your own strength. I get it, but that's not what he said. As a matter of fact, I think it would be a good idea to have the understanding, like it says in 1 Corinthians 14, but when it comes to understanding, be men. You need to know what you're getting into and know why you're trusting the Lord in this situation, not just blindly, well, okay, he's God, so he'll do whatever. That to me, that just seems a bit cheap. The lesson here is about humility. You need to be humble as this little child, right? Humble himself as this little child. All right, so it's not a faith statement. It's a humility statement. These apostles needed to ditch the pride. And in order for them to be exalted in the kingdom, how do you achieve exaltation by the hand of God? You have to humble yourself, and the Lord will exalt you in due time. That's the lesson that they're learning here. So guys, stop focusing on yourself. Start focusing on how you can use all these things the Lord is showing you to help somebody else. And you'll see as the passage goes on how that works. But just to round off our thinking about this child, you don't see little children running around talking about how they want to rule the world and have everybody look at them. Not little ones. As they grow up, sometimes parents teach them that. They get nurtured into that. But I'm talking the general average child as he grows up, you know what he wants to do? He wants to go play with his friends, and go home, eat some food, and go to sleep, and wake up the next day, and he's not trying to take over the world. Right? He's not trying to dominate everybody. Now I know as they grow up, we teach them things where, they're going to outdo each other, and the competitive stuff comes. As time goes on, I know that gets in there. And sometimes the way parents treat their children, they kind of worship their kids and make the kids think they're the center of the universe. And in so doing, they're completely corrupting that child from a young age. Right? But this little kid sitting in the room with all the adults, you have to put yourself 2,000 years ago in that society, where kids were not considered the most important feature in the room, right? And in sitting in that room with all these men talking about these big subjects, and here's this little child just sitting there, humble in the corner, not trying to be seen, not trying to be recognized. Jesus had to say, come here, Bhuti, sit here so we can all see you. You see, that's different than the brat who's constantly making noise and getting attention, right? That's a different situation. But this little child was not trying to get attention. Jesus had to bring him into the center of it. So that's the same way we should approach it, not trying to get attention. In verse 5, and whoso shall receive one such little child in my name receiveth me. So here's the attitude shift, right? These guys were going to use their powers and their knowledge to do what? To minister to the big shots that could return some sort of great favor to them and promote them. And Jesus is trying to shift their attention to say, guys, that little one right there, if you will reach out to them for my sake, in my name, and minister to that little child then becomes an extension of me. And if you're ministering to only the people that can help you in return, then that's all for you. That's for your sake. But you can minister to this little unknown child that no one else is concerned about, but if you do it in my name, the way I told you to, that is some great achievement in Jesus' estimation. So this is a mind shift when it comes to ministry. Is I don't care what I might get out of who I'm going to minister to. If there's somebody in my path and I can help them come to Christ, know God better, whatever, if I can improve their life in the right way, then that's worth my time and effort, regardless of who sees it. In verse 6, but whoso shall offend one of these little ones which believe in me. All right, so this qualifies the little one here. This is not a baby. This little one is able to believe in him. So he's old enough. Now, how old is that? We don't know. I mean, that could be 5, that could be 8. It depends on the child. But Jesus is addressing now little kids that are old enough to at least understand and believe in him. Whoso shall offend one of these little ones which believe in me, it were better for him that a millstone were hanged about his neck, and that he were drowned in the depth of the sea. Whew! That's quite strong language. He's saying you're better off going and dying quickly than to send one of these little ones the wrong direction in life. That's what offending them is to create a stumbling block so that they don't find their, can I use John the Baptist, rather than preparing a way so that they get to the Lord quickly, you're hindering their way so they don't get to the Lord quickly. And I don't know how many times I've found this to be the case where somebody grows up, comes to the office and says, you know what, for years I didn't want to go to church, I didn't want to read the Bible or talk about God because my mom and dad were hypocrites. And they fought like crazy. They went to church. My dad was a deacon. He was an oderling and this and that. But at home he would cuss and drink. And it was mom and dad offending the little one. Jesus says, you're better off just dropping off the face of the earth quickly. That's how important those unknown little ones are to God. Now that's an attitude shift, right? Because we look around and we go, okay, who do we need to reach? We need to reach the big shots. You know, if we can reach the big shots that they can move things in society and they can make things happen. How about you just minister to whoever you have a chance to? Whatever life you can touch, point that life to Christ. Verse number 7. Verse 7, which I'm sorry, I can't leave verse 6 without saying this. In the world in which we now currently live, children are being corrupted at such a young age and at an institutional level. I don't want to get hung up on this for the sake of time, but I heard this I heard this anecdote. This preacher did his homework. It was decided, I don't know how many years ago, about probably a decade ago, the teachers at Harvard were presented with a challenge. How can we turn American society towards this progressive movement? And they said the key to this is teaching the kids while they're young. So we're not going to do this immediately, but by the time the next generation is grown, if we can start now in their preschools and in their kindergarten, like what do you guys call that? Not just the creche, but the pre-primary. Yeah, I'm sorry, a kindergarten. I don't know what. Clear school. There we go. All right. So if we can start there. So at Harvard, what they set out to do is they began training the educators, the people that were majoring in education. They were training them on how to teach the young kids to think in this liberal, leftist, progressive type of way. That was put into effect, like I said, maybe 10 dozen years ago or so. We're seeing the fruit of it. But Jesus said that's a serious offense, to take a child at that age and point them in the wrong direction. Like I said, I don't want to, just with that verse, it has to be drilled into our minds how important it is and how precious it is, even teaching a Sunday school class to a young kid. I know you're just giving them Bible stories and stuff, but showing that child, here's this teacher that has a smile on his or her face and loves the Lord and loves these stories, and it's real to you. And they grow up, even though they don't understand all the Bible and everything with it, they just know teacher, God, joy, Jesus, good, and you're preparing the way. And that, in the mind of Jesus and the heart of God, that's a precious thing. All right, verse 7. Woe unto the world because of offenses. All right, there is no possible outcome in the eternal mind of God. I've explained this at other times. I'll go quickly now. The book of Revelation said the God that was, is, and is to come, right? So he breaks himself into 3 time frames. Was, is to come. Past, present, future. The God in eternity past, or let's say God in eternity past, looking forward, sees every possible outcome. The God in eternity future looks back and he sees one outcome, the way things will actually turn out. And at the same time, he's in the present watching these things happen. Okay? He's in all 3 times at one time, if that makes any sense. So the God in eternity past looks forward and sees every possible outcome. He sees every possible choice that anybody could ever make, because he's God and he can see all that. And every direction he looks, offenses must come. There's not one possible timeline that works out without offenses. The world's going to get worse and worse and worse. Iniquity will abound. It doesn't matter which way you go. All right? Now, that God knows that it's going to happen. He didn't foreordain it to be that way. It's just how we turn out. Then he says, for it must needs be that offenses come. It must needs be. It's going to happen. But woe to that man by whom the offense comes. So he's saying, guys, it's going to get bad. The world's going to be corrupt. But you don't have to be part of it. Yes, there's no scenario. When God looks for it and sees every possible time, every one of them end up with sin abounding. But God also knows that you don't have to be a part of the sin abounding. You can choose to separate yourself from the way the world is going. Verse 8, wherefore, if thy hand or thy foot offend thee. So if you see that you're going the wrong direction and you're not overcoming whatever sin you're struggling with, here's the advice. If thy hand or thy foot offend thee, cut them off and cast them from thee. It is better for thee to enter into life, halt, or maimed, rather than having 2 hands or 2 feet to be cast into everlasting fire. So it's a trade-off, right? Stay whole now, lose everything later. Lose something now, keep everything for later, right? So a little bit of a trade-off. Verse 9, if thine eye offend thee, pluck it out and cast it from thee. It is better for thee to enter into life with 1 eye rather than having 2 eyes to be cast into hell fire. All right? Now, most of the time when preachers get to this, they say, well, this is just hyperbole and Jesus is just making a strong point. I agree, it is a strong point. I don't think he's exaggerating. I think what he's doing is giving you the absolute extreme case. And this is as extreme as it could be. Okay. But he is showing, by telling us what the most extreme case would be, it shows us how serious this is. If this was your only option, the only way you could overcome sin and get to Christ, get to salvation, was to cut off a body part, then it's worth losing the body part. That's a better trade, right? It's a better deal. That way you gain eternity with him. Now, that's the extreme. Here's what I would recommend. Right? Let's try some other things before we start cutting off body parts. Before you mutilate yourself, let's try something else. Before you cut off the hand or pluck out the eye, try cutting the internet cable. cut that off first, right? Cut off the connections you have with your friends that are causing you to do the bad things, right? There are many other things you could cut or pluck that might stop the problem and allow you rather to get focused on the Lord and press towards the right thing, get saved, etc. So I think Jesus, yes, it's extreme. I don't think he's exaggerating, because it's no exaggeration to say better to enter into the kingdom with one eye than have two eyes and go to hell. That's actually a fair statement. But it shows us just how serious the situation is, and how worth whatever sacrifice you need to make to come right with God, it's worth it. Now verse 10, he says, "Take heed that ye despise not one of these little ones," not one. "For I say unto you that in heaven their angels do always behold the face of my Father, which is in heaven." All right? This actually, I think, creates a theme for the rest of the chapter. The relationship you have with people on the earth, right? This horizontal treatment of other people, it has a vertical effect. So the way I'm treating a child, you may look at that and think this child has no idea what I'm doing, and they don't understand the decisions I'm making. I have no effect on their life. They have no effect on my life. What you don't understand is that child has angelic, heavenly representation. So could it be the child doesn't understand fully what you're doing and how bad or good it is, but there's an angel up in heaven saying, "Hey, Father, that guy right down there, he's confused. He's causing that little one to get confused and messed up. And the little one may not know to tell on you, but the angel does. The angel says, Father, we need to put a stop to that guy because he's messing up that kid." And I think that's the connection Jesus is trying to make, to say, guys, be mindful of how you serve the people around you. The little kids, and now we're going to come into church discipline in a moment. Be careful how you have these relationships with the people around you, because it does have a vertical effect. And you're going to see as the chapter unfolds, if you're going to harbor grudges against one another, it affects your prayer life. God won't hear your prayers if you won't forgive one another. So the way you reach out horizontally, it affects the vertical. Now, without getting into a long discussion, verse 10 is one of a few verses in the Bible that is often used to speak to guardian angels. Jesus does not tell us exactly how much involvement these angels have in the lives of a child. The way it's written, I would understand it as to say that each child has some sort of angel watching over them. Now, that's about all I know to say about it. To what extent, I'm not exactly sure. When you graduate from high school, do you lose the angel? You graduate into some, a cherubim? I don't know. There's a verse, and you can write this down, Psalm 91, verse 11. That speaks to not just kids, but anybody. It seems that the whole idea of a guardian angel, or let's say guardian angels just in general, seems like everybody has access to that to some extent. And then Hebrews chapter 1, verse 14, it also talks about how angels are ministering spirits sent forth to minister to them that are heirs of salvation. So there are some verses that speak to it, but we don't have a lot of information, so I hesitate to say too much about that. All right, but know this, the angels are deployed by God, right? So if you need something, don't pray to the angel. Pray to the one that deployed the angel. He'll tell the angel what to do. You don't need to talk to the angel. All right, verse 11. "For the Son of Man is come to save that which was lost." Now, we'll get to the parable here in a moment, but he's talking about little ones. Jesus is interested in saving little ones. We don't need to wait, and this is a gross mistake I see parents making constantly. They're raising their kids and they say, well, I don't want to influence their decisions about God. I want them to decide. So I'm going to leave religion out of our home, and when they're old enough, I'll let them decide. Oh, my goodness, you are offending them by keeping them ignorant. And essentially what you're teaching them is God is not that important. So you are teaching them something by staying silent on it. Nevertheless, the Son of Man has come to save that which was lost, even little kids. Verse 12, "How think ye, if a man have 100 sheep, and one of them be gone astray? Doth he not leave the 99 and goeth into the mountains, and seeketh that which is gone astray?" Well, yes, this is a parable that Jesus uses on a number of occasions. And it just shows that every single individual is important to him. Jesus is not happy with 99% of people being saved. He wants everybody saved. Verse 13, and if so be that he find it, verily I say unto you, he rejoiceth more of that sheep than of the 99 which went not astray. So the idea is, guys, if I find that sheep, I'm going to be extremely happy about it. Now, that's the attitude the disciple should have. And not just when you find some rich guy with a lot of political influence that can make you popular. You know, rejoice when he gets saved because now I'll have my name in the newspaper and I'll be a big deal. What if you lead a little 6-year-old to Christ? Now up in heaven, who gets more rejoicing? The 6-year-old or the 45-year-old politician who's extremely wealthy and very famous? Which one gets more rejoicing? Both of them get the same. Praise God, either of them got saved, right? Because they were lost. That's what the Lord was concerned about. So verse 14, even so it is not the will of your Father, which is in heaven, that one of these little ones should perish. So now the focus of this parable, yes, it's the 90 and 9, the one sheep that goes astray, common parable, but this time it's used to speak about the little ones. Jesus is looking for them. He is going to go through the mountains. He will go through great efforts to reach even the little ones. So if you're the disciple hearing this, how does this affect your attitude? Okay, Lord, it's not about me being great. It's about finding this little 5-year-old, this 7-year-old, and trying to help them understand the Lord and deliver that message to them. So that's where the soft heart of the servant comes in. It's not about me being great. It's about getting that one back to the Father. Now, one other thought I think it must be recognized in verse 14, and we'll stop here for the night. Even so it is not the will of your Father which is in heaven, that, how many of the little ones? That one of these little ones should perish. Okay, so right now, tonight, let's apply this verse. Let's take all the little ones in the world. How many of them does the Father want to be saved? How many of them would the Father desire to perish? Then Calvinism just got thrown out. You can't have Calvinism in that verse. You can't do it. It is impossible to say that God has only elected some and then and to turn around and say, I don't want even one to perish. Because all the little ones are eventually going to become all the big ones. So you can't say once they graduated primary school, well, now I'm okay if they die and go to hell. It's the will of the Father that every single person gets saved. Not 99 out of 100. All of them. All of them. So I know it's kind of strange to find such a strong proof text against Calvinism in this, but wouldn't you know it, the Lord puts it in a parable about little kids. And says, there you go. That's the right way to view the salvation of souls. Okay, so on that happy note, we'll stop, and then next week we'll pick it up in church discipline. Pick it up with all sorts of joy. Okay, any questions about what we've covered tonight? Yes, sir.
I just missed the verse again.
Yep.
On the thing, what's the 2 verses you gave?
Psalm 91, verse 11. Psalm 91, 11. And then Hebrews chapter 1, verse 14. And if any of you want, I'll give you a handful of others. Acts chapter 12, verse 15. Acts 12, 15. Revelation 1, verse 20. That actually talks about the angels of the churches, so it talks about angelic representation over human affairs. Daniel 10, 13. Daniel 12, 1. There's a few verses more in Daniel about angels being involved in the affairs of men. But like I said, the Bible doesn't say a lot about it, but there's a handful of verses for it. Yes, sir. Mm-hmm.
Does that also mean that if a child dies, he goes to heaven? Irrespective of
Right.
what the spirits are or anything?
Yeah, that's a good question. Let me answer that with with Deuteronomy chapter 1. So that verse, right, in the context, Jesus talked about a little one that believes in me. So in this context, that little one was lost, right? Because he said the Son of Man come to seek that which was lost. So this little one is old enough to understand what sin is and has chosen to sin and needs to be saved. Now, in that case, if a child dies but has that understanding of good and evil and has chosen evil, is a guilty of sin. Right, so many churches, many denominations have tried to put a number to the age of accountability. Biblically, there is no number that goes with that age. However, the concept is true. So the age of accountability starts the moment that child understands the difference between good and evil and how it relates to God and chooses to do evil. That child has then sinned and has died spiritually and needs to be born again and saved. But if a child dies before they come to that level of understanding, then they are not saved, they are safe. Right? So God is not going to hold them accountable because they didn't know. But in Matthew 18, it does talk about the kid that believes, little one that believes, coming to save that which is lost. And yes, that type of situation, the child could perish. But Deuteronomy 1, verse 39, this verse kind of delineates where God draws the line for this. Deuteronomy 1:39. Now this is talking about the promised land, but the principle is sound. Moreover, your little ones, which ye said should be a prey, and your children, which in that day had no knowledge between good and evil, they shall go in thither, and unto them will I give it, and they shall possess it. So God did not punish those little ones, even though they were with their mom and dad traveling through the wilderness at some point. He doesn't punish them because they didn't know and they didn't choose to disbelieve or anything. But it's because they had no knowledge between good and evil. Yeah, so that's why I make the cutoff there. Once they have that knowledge of good and evil, now they're accountable. And this goes back to the garden, right? As soon as Eve ate the fruit, she has the knowledge of good and evil, and now she's going to be held accountable. Okay, anything else? Yes, ma'am?
Verse number 3, 18.
Mm-hmm.
Could we almost say that they were in a place of privilege? They were close to Jesus. They
Yes.
did miracles. They were kind of in a small.
Yes, I would say that.
That's good.
Yep.
So could it be that they, because of that point of privilege, that they can feel that bigger than others, they're higher up than others, and
Yep.
more important than others?
I think what you're saying is probably exactly what happened.
Then
Yeah.
Again, it falls back to pride.
Yep.
They became prideful.
Yep. So this place of privilege, being part of the inner circle and close to Jesus, this is something all of us need to be mindful of. So 2 Corinthians chapter 12, remember where Paul said that because of the abundance of revelations, there was given unto me a thorn in the flesh, the messenger of Satan to buffet me, lest I should be lifted up. So that was a preventative measure. Paul was shown so much. If anybody could have got a puffed up head, it would have been Paul. Knowledge puffs up. So Paul could have said, I know so much, bow down. I mean, guys, I'm the one, I'm the source here. So he was given those reminders to say, hey, you're still in need of a lot of grace. So yeah, I think that's what happened though, definitely. But anything else? Yes, sir.
Is the word perish ever used not to refer to eternal damnation?
Yes, a couple times.
So would that not be, would the Calvinists not use that to say, it's not the will of the Father that any child should have some sort of destructive thing happen to them, some
Right.
No offense, but not necessarily talking about eternal damnation, which would kind of be a counter-argument to...
Correct. So the word perish, the reason, we know that in certain places it's used and it doesn't point to eternal damnation, but the context tells us that, not the word itself. Because the word in English and Greek, the word is just the word. It can be destruction, whether temporal or eternal. But the context of Matthew 18, starting all the way up in verse 6, he talks about which believes in me. He's talking about hell fire, everlasting fire. And then verse 11, that which was lost. And then him finding it. That parable is used for somebody getting saved. So I think the context would make it clear as to what we're dealing with. Yeah. All right, anything else? All good? Okay. Not too bad on time. Let's go ahead and have a word of prayer, and we'll let you guys head to the house. Stanislaw, can you please close us in prayer?